For a closer look at the stimulus package, how it is or is not fulfilling expectations, we turn to Mark Zandi, chief economist at moody'seconomy.com. He has consulted with Congress and the White House during the current crisis, and House Minority Whip Eric Cantor of Virginia. We have invited and also hope to be joined by Chris Van Hollen of Maryland, head of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Mark Zandi, I'll start with you because you were at ground zero in all of this when people were talking about the need for a stimulus plan. Is it working?
Yeah, it's working pretty close to what I would have expected at this point in time. It's still early days. You know, we're only 4 or 5 months into the package, but state governments are getting checks. Unemployed workers are getting more benefits. Social Security recipients got a check in the mail in May. People who are working have lower withholding. Business tax cuts are filtering through, and we're even getting some infrastructure spending. So everything is going according to script, at least so far.
Well, let me ask Eric Cantor about that. You've had some disagreements on this point with other members of your body, but also with the White House. What do you think about how the package has been going? And you didn't support it, it should be said.
Right, Gwen. I think that if there's one thing we can all agree upon, as we heard the majority leader in the House, Steny Hoyer, say, as well as the Vice President, that we're all disappointed where things have turned out as we had hoped a lot differently. And, you know, clearly the stimulus or so-called stimulus plan that spent almost $800 billion has not worked. We were promised. The President said we would keep unemployment under 8.5%. We're now over 9.5%, on our way to 10%. We have had a massive hemorrhaging of jobs in this economy. And, you know, the President said that we had to act and act quickly. And I guess that's why Speaker Pelosi felt it very necessary to jam this bill through the House. And now we're seeing that it didn't work. So the question really is, what is the President going to do about it? As the Vice President indicated, it is his economy now. And so let's start to do things in a smart way rather than rush to judgment and then flush out the money without any result.
Let me ask Chris Van Hollen about this, because it was Vice President Biden who said there had been a misreading of the economy, something the President backed away from a little bit. But maybe you can explain to us what it is that Vice President meant by that.
Sure. I think what he meant to say was that the economy that President Obama inherited from George Bush, the economic downturn and the recession inherited from George Bush, turned out to be deeper and the decline steeper than people, including many economists, anticipated. But that's a very separate question as to whether or not we'd be better off today if we did not do the economic recovery plan, which is what Eric is proposing, that we have not have passed that plan. The fact of the matter is, as Mark Zandi said, we're a whole lot better off today than we would have been if that had not been passed. The fact that we're not in an even better place is a reflection of the fact that the economy is in very deep trouble. Now, the fact is also that this is a 2-year economic recovery plan. About $200+ billion has already been committed or spent, and that over the next quarter we anticipate more outlays, because one of the things the President was very clear about and the Congress was very clear about is that we want to make sure that these monies are spent wisely, that they're not wasted. And that requires greater oversight and transparency. So we're trying to accomplish both goals, and we are on track.
If I can ask you that, because you sit on an oversight committee which was talking about this today, and there was some concern among other lawmakers and even some of the folks who testified, governors who testified before you, that maybe the money wasn't being allocated correctly?
Well, the testimony in front of our committee, you said we had 3 governors, and all 3 governors talked about the fact that there had been job creation and jobs saved in their states as a result of this economic recovery package. They were unanimous on that point, that their states were better off as a result of this, and the people who lived in the state were better off as a result of this. Now, what they said was that because of the accountability provisions, some of the money hasn't gotten out of the door as fast as it might have. But again, we want to make sure, and in order to maintain the credibility of this program, that those monies are not misspent. And that requires more oversight and more accountability. And we've asked the governors to participate in making sure that they're the taxpayers' watchdogs with the federal government to make sure those monies are well spent.
Mark Zandi, has that money been spent the way it was supposed to? Have the accountability provisions, as Mr. Van Hollen described them, have they slowed the process? That this was supposed to be a speedy injection, and has that slowed it?
Yeah, I think to some degree, sure. I mean, I think everyone wants to make sure that the money gets out in a proper way, and that requires a lot more information to be provided, and that slows things down. But let me say, I do think things are getting out pretty close to what I would have expected. Now, the infrastructure spending, the money for roads and bridges and other things, that's going to take time, and under the best of circumstances, I don't think that we would expect really to see that towards the second half of this year into 2010. All the other parts of the stimulus, the tax cuts, the tax credit for a first-time home buyer, the benefits to businesses, the aid to state government, that is already flowing to the economy, and I think it is having an impact. And here's the most important point. The biggest economic impact from the stimulus isn't now. It's really going to be in the third quarter, the Q3, and more importantly, in Q4 of this year. So we really won't know with any degree of certainty until very late this year whether this stimulus plan is working and working well enough.
Mr. Cantor, how about that? Is it just too soon to say?
Well, Glenn, I am just sitting here a little bit in disbelief about making the excuses for the failure of this bill. The president promised that we would do something to stave off the job loss. And if you are talking about what a stimulus bill should do, it was about preserving, protecting, and creating jobs. This bill has failed miserably towards that end. Chris indicates that maybe we, as Republicans, wanted to do nothing. Now, he knows that's not true. We presented a plan to the president. It was a plan focused on the job generators, which were small business people. We've got to go about getting investment started again in this economy. That's the only way that recovery will take place. Any kind of lasting rebound has to come from investor confidence, from working families, from small businesses putting their money back to work again. This bill has failed in terms of that end. What we've seen now is, as you indicated, Gwen, tremendous job loss. People are losing jobs at about 8 jobs a minute. That's 8 households no longer seeing their paycheck, wondering how they're going to get through the end of the month. If you're a factory worker in the Midwest, if you haven't lost your job already, you're worried you're going to lose it. If you are a retail sales clerk, you know what? You are worried about your job because what do we have coming next is we've got a wage hike that will be imposed on employers. Now what we see in Congress is a massive attempt to impose a national energy tax on families. We've got too many things going in the opposite direction when we should be about creating jobs here.
Let me ask you about this, Mr. Cantor. They say they have created or saved 150,000 jobs so far. Is there any argument to be made that Larry Summers and others have made, the economic advisor, that there should have been more money spent on this?
How can you say that? How can you say that when unemployment now is approaching 10%? The president had promised that we were going to save unemployment from going past 8.5%. That's why we needed to act with such urgency. As Chris indicates now, all of a sudden we're realizing that there's a lot of waste involved when you flush out $800 billion from Washington. Never does the federal government perform the way that we could see small businesses perform. We've got to go put in confidence back into our economy. We do that by helping small businesses. We need an investment-led recovery, not Washington spending our way out. All we're doing is piling up the debt right now, and I think it's reflected in the lack of confidence in the economy, in the markets, and certainly in the polling over the last few days.
Chris Van Hollen, listening to what Eric Cantor just had to say, it's clear that you're not going to get support for a second stimulus from his side of the aisle, but is there even going to be support for another infusion from your side of the aisle?
Well, let me first say, Glenn, I think the American people are smarter than to think that you can turn over an economy or turn it around on a dime when you've got an economy that is sinking quickly. I think I give the American people more credit than that. Number two, the President Obama's recovery plan had a big component of tax relief for middle income and lower income Americans, unlike the Republican plan, which was essentially all tax relief, when in fact, and adding more to the deficit. Finally, if there's any criticism that could be levied, as you suggest, there's some people who are saying that we should have done more by way of investments. If you had the way my Republican colleagues, we would have done a whole lot less, and we would have been in much deeper trouble. This is like running up a down escalator.
What about the second stimulus? Is that possible?
Well, I think it would be premature to talk about that now. As Mark Zandi has said, we expect more of the money to be expended in the third quarter. I think we're going to have to wait and see what impact that has on the economy. But again, if you're running up an escalator that's going down, if you stand still, you're going down fast. And the reason we're continuing to make some progress is that we continue to take some steps forward, but because we've inherited an economy going down fast, it obviously is difficult to feel. And I understand, of course, people are suffering out there. We would all like to see things turn around more quickly. We inherited quite a mess, and we're trying to fix it.
Mark Zandi, you're the non-politician here. Give me the pros and cons quickly of whether a second stimulus is desired or even necessary or politically feasible.
Yeah, well, I think it's premature to conclude one way or the other. We'll have to wait till the end of the year, see how this stimulus is working, and then at that point make a determination. But here, I'll give you a benchmark. We lost 2.1 million jobs in the first quarter. We lost 1.3 million jobs in the second quarter. In the current quarter, if we lose 750,000, and in the fourth quarter, 400,000, and by this time next year, we're not losing any jobs, then by my definition, this stimulus had worked reasonably well, and we won't need another stimulus.
Mark Zandi of MoodysEconomy.com, Eric Cantor, House Minority Whip, and Chris Van Hollen with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. Thank you all three very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.